They told you that controlling your anger makes you weak, that real strength means hitting back, that silence is surrender, that if someone disrespects you and you say nothing, you lose. You've been living by that code your entire life, and look where it's gotten you. Still reactive, still triggered by strangers, still handing your power to people who have done nothing to deserve it. That code is not strength. It is a leash, and someone else is holding the other end. Machiavelli understood something 5 centuries ago that modern psychology is only now beginning to prove. The man who cannot govern his emotions cannot govern anything. Not a room, not a relationship, not his own life. He is permanently, structurally available for manipulation. He is prey. There are 8 specific shifts that separate the reactive from the untouchable. The 8th one will dismantle everything you think emotional mastery actually means. If that sounds uncomfortable, good. Discomfort means you are still close enough to the truth to feel it. Close the video if you want. Go back to losing your temper and calling it dignity. But if you are ready to become the kind of person that cannot be moved, then stay. You were brainwashed to believe that anger is power. Watch someone lose their temper in public. What do you actually see? Not strength, not authority. You see a person whose behavior is being dictated by external events. You see someone predictable, and predictable is the most dangerous thing to be, because predictable is controllable. Society, especially the entertainment culture you grew up in, ran this lie on a loop. The hero snaps. The hero explodes. The hero destroys everything in a righteous fury and walks away victorious. Beautiful on screen, lethal in real life. Because in real life, the person who explodes is the one who gets fired, arrested, outmaneuvered, or quietly discarded by people who were patient enough to wait for the breakdown they knew was coming. Machiavelli observed this pattern across every court, every army, every political body in Renaissance Italy. He wrote in The Prince, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." But the deeper truth embedded in that observation is this: fear is generated by control, not by chaos. The prince who raged and wept generated not fear, but contempt. The prince who smiled while calculating 3 moves ahead generated something far more durable: dread. Robert Greene, in the 48 Laws of Power, formalized this same principle across 4 centuries of strategic history. Law 4. Always say less than necessary. Law 39. Stir up waters to catch fish. The pattern is identical. Reactivity is a trap set by the competent for the emotional. You were handed the wrong map. This video gives you the right one. Phase 1. Anger is data, not instruction. The average man treats anger the same way he treats hunger. It arises and he feeds it immediately. No analysis, no delay. The feeling becomes the action, and the action becomes the consequence. The master treats anger as a signal. Something was perceived as a threat. Something triggered an ancient protective response. The question is never, how do I punish the trigger? The question is always, what does this signal tell me about the situation, and what response serves my actual goals? Neuroscientist Dr. Joseph Ledoux mapped the amygdala's role in what he called the fear circuit, the biological pathway that initiates an emotional response before the rational brain even registers what happened. When someone insults you, a threat response fires in your brain roughly 12 milliseconds before any conscious processing begins. That surge of heat you feel is not your judgment. It is your biology. It is old.
It is not designed for the modern strategic environment you actually live in. The Spartans understood this. Spartan warriors trained not to eliminate fear or anger, but to delay their expression until after the battle assessment was complete. A Spartan who charged ahead of formation out of personal rage was not celebrated. He was punished. Because individual emotional reaction, however justified, destroys collective strategic advantage. Your practical move: when you feel the surge, press your feet into the floor, deliberately. Breathe once, long and controlled, through your nose. This is not spiritual practice. This is a physical interrupt that buys the prefrontal cortex the 4 seconds it needs to come back online. 4 seconds is the difference between the response you want and the reaction you will regret. And ask yourself before you open your mouth or raise your voice, does reacting right now advance my position, or does it reveal it? If it reveals it, you already know what to do. Phase 2. You are not being attacked. You are being tested. Most people who provoke you are not actually thinking about you at all. That is the first thing to understand. What they are doing is exporting their internal chaos outward, looking for a host. You happen to be present. Psychologist Albert Bandura documented through his social learning theory that aggressive behavior is rarely about the target. It is about the actor's own need for perceived control, status reinforcement, or emotional regulation through dominance displays. When someone disrespects you, they are not making an assessment of your worth. They are advertising the instability of their own. This reframe is not soft. It is tactical. When you stop taking the provocation personally, you stop generating the emotional response the provocateur needs to feel successful. You disappear from their equation. They are left shouting at a wall. The 3 types of provocateur you will encounter: the threatened, who attacks because your existence highlights their inadequacy; the attention-starved, who provokes because invisibility is their deepest fear; and the unconsciously wounded, who spreads pain because they are saturated with it. None of them are actually responding to you. They are responding to their own internal landscape, using you as a screen. Julius Caesar knew this. When senators attempted to humiliate him in public debate, questioning his military decisions, his lineage, his legitimacy, Caesar responded not with fury, not with defense, but with a kind of amused observation, as if watching children. He understood the structure of the provocation. He understood it had nothing to do with him, and that understanding made him impossible to bait. Your practical move: when someone comes at you, ask one internal question. What are they afraid of? Not as an act of compassion, as an act of intelligence. The answer tells you everything about how much attention their behavior deserves. Almost always, the answer is nothing. What does that tell you about how much to react? Phase 3. The mask of indifference is not a lie. It is armor. You are still here. Good. The fragile ones already left. They wanted validation for their rage, not a strategy to transcend it. Here is the psychological mechanism nobody talks about. Human beings are wired to seek feedback. In every interaction, we are scanning the environment for data. Did my words land? Did I create an effect? Is the other person moved? When you give them nothing,
No visible shift in breathing, no micro-expression of distress, no defensive posture, no verbal filler. You destroy their feedback loop. They are now operating blind, and people hate operating blind. The mask of indifference is the practice of controlling what your face, posture, and voice communicate to the external world, regardless of what is happening internally.
This is not emotional suppression. Research in effective neuroscience, particularly work from Dr. James Gross at Stanford on cognitive reappraisal versus suppression, confirms that suppression costs you physiological resources and backfires under sustained stress. The mask is not suppression. It is performance architecture. You acknowledge the emotion internally. You simply do not broadcast it. Napoleon employed this relentlessly. Ambassadors who arrived expecting to destabilize him through insult or provocation left the room having successfully provoked only their own anxiety. Napoleon did not react. He observed. He cataloged. He used the information later. In the moment, he gave nothing. Your practical move: when a provocation lands, let 2 full seconds pass before your face changes. Then let it settle into neutral. Not a smile, not a scowl. Neutral. The expression of someone watching a transaction that does not involve them. Practice this alone in a mirror first. Because the face you make under pressure is a habit, and habits can be interrupted, overwritten, and rebuilt. The moment you give someone nothing to work with, they are no longer attacking you. They are performing in an empty theater. Phase 4. Silence is not the absence of power. It is the purest form of it. The average person, when confronted with an attack, feels compelled to fill the space, to explain, to justify, to defend. This compulsion is learned helplessness wearing the costume of assertiveness. Because every word you speak in defense is more information you have handed to someone who is trying to defeat you. Strategic silence operates on a principle ancient enough that Machiavelli built it into his entire model of the effective prince. The ruler who speaks less is the ruler who cannot be quoted, misquoted, or cornered. Uncertainty is not weakness when you are the one generating it deliberately. Uncertainty, engineered through restraint, is leverage. Joe Navarro, former FBI behavioral analyst and author of What Every Body Is Saying, documented across decades of interrogation and behavioral research that silence creates intense psychological pressure in most people. The discomfort of unresolved conversational space compels disclosure. People fill silence with truth because silence feels like accusation. You do not have to accuse. You simply have to wait. Your practical move: when someone delivers a provocation, an insult, a challenge, an attempt to bait you into an emotional position, do not speak for 5 full seconds. Count them internally. Make eye contact. Do not blink aggressively. Just hold. In 5 seconds, the room will shift. The person who spoke will often begin to backpedal, explain, or repeat themselves nervously. They just handed you the entire exchange, and all you did was breathe. Silence is a filter. It removes people who cannot handle your stillness from your inner circle. If someone escalates because you refused to be baited, they have just shown you everything you needed to know about whether they belong in your life. Comment below. I operate in silence. Phase 5. Approval is an external dependency. External dependencies are vulnerabilities. Here is the uncomfortable architecture underneath most emotional reactivity. If you can be provoked, it means someone holds something you want, validation, respect, status, recognition. Their opinion matters to you more than you would like to admit. And that mattering, that is the mechanism of control. Attachment theory, formalized by John Bowlby and extended by researchers like Dr. Sue Johnson, shows that human beings develop templates in childhood for how they regulate emotional security. For most people, that template relies heavily on external signals, approval, connection, responsiveness from others. When that approval is withheld or reversed, the nervous system responds as if to a genuine threat, because historically, exclusion from the group was a threat. It meant death. You are not in that environment anymore. But your nervous system does not know that unless you teach it. The Medici, specifically Cosimo de' Medici, operated in a political environment where public approval could reverse overnight. He survived 5 decades of Florentine politics not by chasing approval, but by rendering it irrelevant to his operational stability. His self-assessment was internal. His strategy was independent of who liked him. He cultivated reputation deliberately, but he did not need it to function. That distinction is the entire game. Your practical move. Identify one person whose opinion currently has disproportionate power over your emotional state. Write down 3 things you would do differently if their approval were simply not a variable. Now understand, those actions are the ones your self-sovereignty requires. The approval is the cage. The actions outside it are the life you are not yet living. Detachment from approval is not coldness. It is the structural freedom that makes every other strategy in this script possible. Phase 6. You cannot rule what you will not examine. Before you can govern the external world, you must govern the interior one. This is not a motivational phrase. It is a tactical prerequisite. The inner kingdom is the sum of your automatic responses, the emotional grooves worn into your behavior by years of conditioning, unprocessed experience, and habitual reaction. Most people never examine these grooves. They live in them like channels, going where the path already runs. Psychologist Viktor Frankl, who developed logotherapy while surviving 4 Nazi concentration camps, articulated what may be the most practical psychological insight of the 20th century. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space is your kingdom. And right now, for most people, it is the size of a millisecond. Your practical move. When you feel a reaction building, apply what behavioral psychologists call a cognitive interrupt. Label the emotion, not "I am angry," but "I notice anger is present." That linguistic shift moves you from inside the emotion to outside it, from participant to observer. It sounds minor. The physiological impact is measurable. You are activating prefrontal processing at the exact moment the amygdala is trying to run uncontested. Do this consistently, and the space widens. Milliseconds become seconds. Seconds become the room where all real power lives. Phase 7. Patience is not passive. It is predatory. The impulsive response always reveals the hand. It announces the wound, the insecurity, the mechanism of control.
and the patient observer catalogues everything.
Machiavelli studied the collapse of impulsive princes with the detached fascination of a surgeon studying a body in the morgue. Their pattern was invariable. A provocation arrived. Emotional reaction displaced strategic thought. The response was disproportionate, poorly timed, or openly revealing. And the provocateur, patient, strategic, waiting, moved. Robert Greene devoted the 35th law of power to this dynamic. Master the art of timing. The law is explicit. Never seem to be in a hurry. Hurrying betrays a lack of control over yourself and over time. Be a detective of the right moment. Sniff out the spirit of the times, the trends that will carry you to power. Playing the long game requires you to be comfortable with the unresolved, to let situations breathe, to allow people to expose themselves across time rather than forcing confrontation in moments where you have incomplete information and compromised emotional clarity. Sometimes the most powerful move is to step back completely. Allow circumstances to do what you would have done clumsily in rage. Because human beings who operate through manipulation, impulsiveness, and dishonesty are structurally self-defeating. They do not need your help to collapse. They just need time. Your practical move: when you want to respond immediately, wait 24 hours. Not because the response will be softer, it may be sharper, colder, more precise, but because 24 hours separates the emotional surge from the decision. What remains after that separation is strategy, and strategy wins over reaction every single time. Phase 8. Becoming untouchable is not an achievement, it is a transformation. The untouchable person is not arrogant. Arrogance is the overcompensation of someone who still needs to prove something. The untouchable person has nothing left to prove because the internal standard has been set and met, quietly, without audience. They walk into any room, and the room rearranges itself slightly, not because the person announced themselves, but because calm, rooted people generate a gravitational field that most humans respond to instinctively. You feel it when you encounter it. The person who cannot be rattled, the person whose face tells you nothing, and whose silence feels like a verdict. This is what Machiavelli was writing toward when he spent his years of exile and torture in San Casciano, stripped of position, stripped of power, under threat of further punishment, and still wrote The Prince. The man had everything taken from him. What no one could take was the interior architecture, the clarity, the sovereign relationship with his own mind. He built something that has outlasted every prince he ever advised. This freedom is cold. It will cost you the comfort of being understood, the warmth of constant approval, the simple pleasure of letting yourself explode and being forgiven for it. It is a lonely discipline, but it is the only freedom that is truly yours. Because every other kind of freedom can be revoked. Someone can take your money, your status, your relationships, your health. No one can take the mastery of your own responses from you once it is built. That is the fortress. That is the throne. That is the sovereignty Machiavelli understood, and modern culture has spent 500 years trying to convince you to trade away for the dopamine of immediate reaction. Do not trade it. You made it to the end. That is not a small thing. Most people cannot tolerate this kind of instruction without needing to break away and validate their reactivity somewhere else. You stayed.
That tells you something about who you already are. But knowing and building are different things.
The architecture of the untouchable is constructed in real time, under actual pressure. Every time the provocation arrives, and you choose the pause over the explosion, the silence over the defense, the long game over the immediate release. That is the practice. Daily, unglamorous, compounding. Subscribe not because I asked you to. Subscribe because you are done being readable, done being predictable, done handing your remote control to people who have done nothing to earn access to your internal state. There is a version of this content I cannot publish openly. The deeper mechanics of psychological positioning, of strategic relationships, of what the sovereign does when patience is not enough. That is behind the membership wall. What the algorithm suppresses, what the crowd is not ready for. You are already not the crowd. You know where to find it. Go build the kingdom.